Hello and welcome back to another episode of Biblical Unlocks. Today we're going to be going through Joshua chapter 16. So we're going to be unpacking, the story of how the people receive a real promise from God and then they stop short of fully taking hold of it. And something I want to point out here is that partial obedience results in partial peace. And in Joshua chapter 16, we're going to unpack Ephraim and half Manasseh's inheritance. Quite a short chapter, only 10 verses. We're also going to be talking about the borders of the land, the danger of leaving pockets of resistance untouched, and I'll give you one immediate action to help you press through unfinished obedience in this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help build your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. If you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's get a little bit of context into the chapter. Alright, so Joshua chapter 16 describes the inheritance of the sons of Joseph, Ephraim and the half-tribe of Manasseh. The chapter actually lays out the borders of Ephraim's land and notes that even after the allotment, the Canaanites were not fully driven out but were instead put to forced labor. And the detail here matters because the chapter is about real gift, real land, and real incompletion. We talked about this right at the beginning, right? Partial obedience leaves partial peace. So the opposite of that would be wholehearted, full obedience, like what we saw with Caleb, like what we saw with Joshua, right? We need to be wholeheartedly and fully committed to the ways of the Lord. Okay, let's read verses 1 to 4. The focus here is going to be Joseph's sons receiving their inheritance. Verse 1. And before that, the question for this section of the chapter is, why are Ephraim and Manasseh grouped together under Joseph? Verse 1, the allotment of the Josephites went from the Jordan by Jericho, east of the waters of Jericho, into the wilderness, going up from Jericho into the hill country to Bethel. Then going from Bethel to Luz, it passes along to Ataroth, the territory of the Archites. Then it goes down westward to the territory of the Japhletites, as far as the territory of Lower Beth Horon, then to Gezer, and it ends at the sea. The Josephites, Manasseh and Ephraim, received their inheritance. Okay, biblical unlock number 1. Why Ephraim and Manasseh described as the sons of Joseph in this particular instance is because the land is being given in continuity with the patriarchal promises of before. So remember that Joseph's line receives a double portion, and the chapter is going to remind Israel that inheritance is always tied to God's long memory. So this distribution of land is the promise that we saw all the way back in Genesis unfolding even now in Joshua. So the inheritance here is as grace passed forward through God's covenant story, and God's gifts arriving through historical continuity, and not necessarily through like instantaneous gratification. What I also notice about this particular chapter is how the inheritance that is passed forward is sort of resemblance of the grace that is passed through Christ, in that we are inheriting something that is not of our own. And so the only thing we can be doing in this situation is to be humble, right? Because when we receive a gift we did not earn, right? Otherwise that would be like a reward, right? A gift is something that you receive freely and that you did not do anything to deserve, but yet you get it anyway. And what you'll notice as well is the chapter begins with the formal allotment. So the covenant blessings, again, they always take this form of public order, and the land here is claimed and assigned under God's authority. So it's again showing that God's gifts, they're not chaotic or like tribal possessions, but that they are served through order and peace. And that's something that I would like to emphasize in this particular instance as well. Okay, let's read verses 5 to 10 now. This is going to be the final part of the chapter. Yes, only 10 verses, but the focus here is going to be on Ephraim's borders and cities. And my question for you is, why are the borders and city names worth slowing down for? Verse 5. The territory of the Ephraimites by their families was as follows. The boundary of their inheritance on the east was Adaroth Adar, as far as Upper Beth Horon, and the boundary goes from there to the sea. On the north is Mikmethath, Then on the east, the boundary makes a turn towards Tanath Silho and passes along beyond it on the east to Genoa. Then it goes down from Genoa to Ataroth and to Nara and touches Jericho, ending at the Jordan. From Tapua, the boundary goes westward to the Wadi Kana and ends at the sea. Such is the inheritance of the tribe of the Ephraimites by their families, together with the towns that were set apart for the Ephraimites within the inheritance of the Manassites, all those towns with their villages. They did not, however, drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer, so the Canaanites have lived within Ephraim till this day, but have been made to do forced labor. Okay, biblical unlock number 2. We see that the boundaries, again, or the borders, are described incredibly precisely, right? And the reason is because, again, this promise is real. It's in place. The borders are protecting the inheritance. They define the responsibility, and again, they prevent confusion with the neighboring tribes. So this is a holy geography, if you will. God's promise is not just some vague thing, okay? It is a real, inspired covenant. And the land has limits and duties. So the structure is a part of that divine wisdom. And structure is not opposed to God's will. In fact, sometimes we need to humble ourselves to have some structure in our lives, have some structure in what we're doing, so that we can live according to God's purposes. What I also find interesting is that the cities are mentioned as well as the borders, right? So it's interesting. You have the borders and you have the cities present. So life happens in the cities and the homes, right? It's not just in some territory that happens. The chapter also keeps naming the locations to show that God's covenant life fills ordinary space. The land is not just a map, it is a lived inheritance. This is where the covenant is taking place. You have the boundaries and you have the cities. And that is what is interesting. The spiritual life here is embodied and lived in concrete places, and holiness can touch everything, whether it be in the streets, homes, routines, because there is a common misconception, and I feel like it's a subconscious one, where you feel as though there's the religious life and then there is my own life, and you don't want the religious life getting in the way of the home life and or your real life, if you will, and you want them to be distinct. But the truth is they have to be interweaved with each other, right? They have to be foundational to each other, and they cannot be separated from each other. You'll notice in verse 10 as well, the Canaanites were not fully driven out, right? So the question there is, what does incomplete conquest reveal about covenant faithfulness? And what's interesting is the Canaanites, right? The text ends by saying that because inherited promise can still be resisted. Ephraim does not fully remove the Canaanites, and the chapter names that without softening. They say it is something that is a failure according to the covenant. They did not remove all of the Canaanites from among them. Now, you have to remember what the Canaanites were doing before we forget, right? The Canaanites were offering child sacrifice to their gods. They would heat up bronze statues and put their children on it until they burned in order to offer their children to Moloch, right? So these were very evil people. And what's interesting about this in particular, right, is the chapter names this without softening it. It shows how easily compromise can settle in when a people stop pressing on obedience. And this is a partial victory, and it can become the seed of future trouble. That unfinished obedience, that is not neutral. It leaves room for danger to creep in. You let sin enter into your door, then it takes over the entire house, right? It goes and sleeps in your bed. This is why you need to be very careful about what you want to enter into your soul. A tree falls not like instantaneously. A tree falls the way it leans, and you have to watch the way you lean. And what you'll notice as well is they make the Canaanites forced laborers instead. And it looks practical, and I guess it's showing compromise within a certain sense, but they gained some control, but they did not fully obey God's command. And the text actually leaves this tension unresolved. And we have to ask ourselves, has convenience replaced faithfulness? What is happening here, right? Are we trying to be comfortable rather than actually following God's words, God's promises? Are we being obedient to the covenant that God has instituted, or are we just letting go because it's inconvenient for us to actually live that out in our everyday lives? Okay, let's see how this chapter fulfills Jesus Christ. All right, so Joshua chapter 16 shows inheritance received, but also unfinished obedience. In Christ, that tension is actually transformed because we as believers receive a real inheritance now. Yet, we must still press on until the promise is fully possessed. Jesus does not leave his people with partial salvation. He calls them to a faith that keeps advancing because what he gives is meant to be fully lived, not merely admired from a distance and not something which is inconvenient to our present ways. This is why we read in Hebrews chapter 3 verse 14, "For we have become partners of Christ if only we hold our first confidence firm to the end." That is what Joshua 16 is all about. A call to perseverance. The one who perseveres till the end is the one who will be saved. The inheritance is real and it must be held fast, and we must struggle and keep going even though it hurts, even though you feel pain, even though you feel suffering. You must continue till the end. You must not let any sin enter into you, and if you do, you must confess it so that God can work within you. Do not compromise the covenant for your present satisfaction, but instead endure till the end, and you will be saved, and you will receive a gift, a worthy reward greater than anything that could be possibly manufactured or imagined on earth. All right, so how can we apply this chapter in our everyday life? I think just identifying areas where you've settled, right, for partial obedience, that is something I think which is important and very in line with the context of this particular chapter. There are going to be situations where you have settled when you should have actually gone all the way for God. There have been situations where you have compromised your beliefs. You have softened what you have believed in order to not provoke any anger or to make sure that you fit in or so that you are liked by a particular group. You should not. Even though it's painful, even though it's hard, even though if you hold to your beliefs, you may be ostracized, you may be completely lost. We know something, right? That we will always be one with Christ regardless of what happens. And you know what's also crazy? That if we win Christ, we will always have him forever. The people that we are surrounded with, they are temporary, transient. And instead, we are going to continue to be obedient. We're going to continue that carrying our cross regardless of how much it hurts, because we know that Christ carried that cross first for us. He paid the penalty we deserved for the sins we have committed. And now we can live on with that confidence, knowing that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever, and that we are going to be in communion with him. And that is our ultimate goal. No matter what we experience, that is our ultimate goal. Heaven is in our hearts, and the hope that we have, we wish to share. If people do not want to receive that, that is fine. You pray for them, you dust your sandals, and you move on. Alright, so that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. Next time we're going to move from Ephraim's inheritance to the tension inside Joseph's family in Joshua chapter 17. We're going to unpack again the daughters of Zelophehad, the hill country, and what to do when a great inheritance feels too small for your faith. You don't want to miss it. So, in this episode we learned that Ephraim and Manasseh inherit through the promise given to Joseph's line. The borders and city names matter because promise must take shape in real places. Inheritance is public, ordered, and tied to covenant responsibility. That incomplete conquest is not a small detail. It exposes compromise, and that Christ calls his people to hold fast their beginning unto the end. So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to rate the show and follow. It's free, it helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.